Today, we're going to be talking about the research process itself. We're going to be covering all of these aspects. So let's begin. The first thing we need to do is to identify problem areas. We need to know that there's a problem in order for us to have to research something about it. And the problem area refers to the entire situation that we may detect where we need research and problem solving. And within a business setting, this could be related to problems that currently exist that need to be solved, areas that a manager specifically believes that need to be improved, a conceptual or theoretical issue, and some research questions actually don't address a problem, but they're just something that we want to empirically address, like what we discussed in another previous class about data being done for the sake of having knowledge. Now, it's true that when we approach business research, or when we identify a problem, during the research process itself, new problems may arise. So it could be even an audit being done by a third party to identify, for example, how to optimize the job roles of your current employees. There could be a problem detected there, which would have to be addressed. So there could be things that we don't see here, which would have to be addressed later on. What can we see? For example, training programs, perhaps they're not as effective as we had anticipated. Let's see the reasoning why. Why is this volume not selling as much as we had hoped? Why are we having issues with our inventory? The control that we have over the inventory is not being effective. Why are there specific departments in our company that are not advancing in their careers? And why can't we adopt a flexible mode of work? And what issues has that arisen for other organizations, for example? Which brings us to data collection. First of all, we have to see what kind of data we have to gather in order to know where we have to go find our research, find our information. So we could classify it into three different categories. First of all, we need to know what's the background information. And usually we need to get information about the organization. Number two, we have to know what has already been researched out there on this topic. So you can go to other organizations or perhaps market information that's already out there about that specific topic itself. And then we need to address the type of secondary data. We can see that primary data, we discussed this in another class. Primary data is all of that we have collected specifically for our research, and secondary data is all that data that has been collected for another entity's research. For example, doctoral dissertation or a thesis, for example. That could be secondary data. So the actual specific company data can be obtained through your own internal means. However, when we are looking for data that is being gathered outside of our organization from previous research that has been done, we need to address secondary data. And some secondary sources of data are statistical bulletins, government publications. There are companies that work on market research and they have lots of data out there. And then there are other kinds of information that we see, which is primary data, such as, we already discussed this, perceptions and attitudes of employees, observation of events, observation of our employees, surveys to our employees, for example, primary data. And when we talk about collecting data, the very first thing that we have to do is to create a literature review, because this helps us to identify and highlight the important factors that are related to the problem. So let's discuss the literature review. The first step in this process is creating a literature survey. And the survey is easy peasy. It's the documentation of a comprehensive review of published and unpublished work from secondary sources of data, not primary sources of data. Remember, primary is what we have as our organization, and we have already created or are going to embark on a research process in order to obtain primary data, and secondary data and is all that is already out there that we can access. Obviously, when we talk about gathering data, the very first resource that comes to mind is the library, or also the World Wide Web. The library is great. You guys already know how it works. You have lots of secondary data, books that have been done on the subject, or reviews that have been done on the subject. And you guys can access these for free and borrow them. Then we also have databases, which are available. This makes everything, the entire library searching process much easier. Can you imagine what it was like writing a thesis 20 years ago? When there was not a lot of resources available on the internet, and you actually had to go to whichever library happened to have that book that you needed specifically for that research project. You had to either check it out, or if it was a reference-only book, which also happens, you would have to stay there and spend a lot of money photocopying. So the internet has obviously helped us a lot, and computerized databases are a great step in helping us to research and be able to have this information at our fingertips. Why is it important? The very first part that is important about a literature review is that it helps us define the important variables that will help us to identify or influence the problem, and make sure that we don't leave anything out of the study. It helps us to develop the theoretical framework and hypotheses for testing. You guys remember that we discussed this previously. As part of the research process, we actually have to create and hypothesize a possible solution which we believe could be helping us to resolve that problem, because this will tell us in what direction we have to go with our research process. And then, of course, the problem statement must be made, which we will be talking about in just a few minutes. Why else is the literature review important to begin with? Because it helps to test and replicate the findings of the current research, and it helps us to enhance these findings. We avoid wasting time, wasting effort on trying to find something out which is already known. So before you embark on the research, first check and see if perhaps somebody has already covered that. And of course, we can see that the problem that is investigated is actually being perceived by the scientific community as something relevant and significant. So to begin with, the literature review has to be done on specific issues of concern to the researchers and the factors that are identified during the interview process. And there are various steps that have to be followed. The first step in this process involves identifying the various published and unpublished materials that are already available to you. So perhaps a professor's thesis is not available in the library because they're still working on it, or perhaps you can reach out to that person who is a specialist in a specific topic, and you can have access to the information that is going to be included in the thesis, for example. The second step of the literature review is to gather all relevant information. You can do that in the library, you can do that online, whichever way you want to do, but it's basically going through all of the relevant information and analyzing and assessing which one will be important for your research. And obviously the third step is actually writing up the literature review. And what data sources can we have? Textbooks, academic journals, theses, conferences, etc. This brings us to the end of our first video. I will be right back with the second video.